Welcome to this LSE event entitled City of Hope. It's an event that is sponsored by LSE Cities and the School of Public Policy at the LSE. It's also a hybrid event. Emily, I just want to check at the back that you're all good on Zoom there with our Zoom audience. All good? Okay. My name is Suzanne Hall and I'm a professor of sociology and head of department here at the LSE, but much more importantly, I was born in Joburg and I spent 10 years working in Cape Town. And so it's a special pleasure for me to be with all of you here tonight. Can I have a show of hands? How many South Africans we have in the audience? Oh, amazing. Absolutely amazing. Great to see you. So it's wonderful to be joined by Geordin Hill-Lewis, who's the Mayor of Cape Town, as well as Desné Masie, who's a visiting senior fellow here at the LSE Firoz Lalji Institute for Africa. Geordin is a politician who represents the Democratic Alliance Party, which is South Africa's main opposition party. He's been Mayor of Cape Town for 2 years, and he's one of the city's youngest ever mayors. In fact, he was first elected to Parliament in 2011 at the age of 24, and he's also served as Shadow Minister for Finance. Desné Masie is an economist and a journalist, and she specializes in international political economy and sustainable finance. I think one of her big passions is energy. She's held senior roles in academia, media, and finance in the UK and South Africa, and actively advises governments and major multinational corporations on geopolitical risk and public policy. Now, one of the things that's so important about the event tonight is that South Africa has a major election in 2024. It's one of the approximate 50 major elections globally that are going to definitely alter the landscape of our democratic futures. But it's also particularly significant for South Africa because this is now 30 years since Nelson Mandela came into power as the first democratically elected president of South Africa. For those of you who know Cape Town, it's a city of profound physical beauty, but it is also a city of profound inequalities. And so one of the aspects that we're going to be exploring tonight is what is the role of metropolitan governance? How do we think imaginatively about municipal capacity when we have immense challenges at global, national, and municipal scales around questions of redistribution and also possibilities for different forms of economic growth that are also about attending to social justice. And so we're going to be hearing about the prospects of metropolitan governance from Geordin, but we're also going to be hearing about what it's been like being in power for 2 years and what does it mean to have infrastructural capacity? How do we think differently about large-scale possibilities of engineering to change the way in which people live sustainably and equitably? And so we're going to be talking about some of those pragmatics as well. Geordin's going to come up and give his talk first. We're then going to allow Desney to respond, and then I'd be very happy to take questions from the floor. And the way we're going to do the Q&A tonight, as per the way we usually do at LSE, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves. I'm going to ask you to stick to one question, please, and we're going to take a couple of questions at a time. For those of you who want to be sharing some of your responses on social media, the hashtag for tonight's event is LSE Public Policy. And so please join me in giving the warmest possible welcome to Geordin. Fantastic to have you with us.
Well, a very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. I am so very grateful to the London School of Economics for the kind invitation, especially LSE Cities and the School of Public Policy, represented this evening by Professor Hall and Dr. Masie, and by Professor Savas Verdis. Thank you so much. And thanks especially to all of you, folks, for deciding to join us this evening, and to those of you joining us online. It's great to have you with us as well. I must say it is a distinct honor to be here at the LSE with all of you. As a fellow student of economics, I once dreamed of studying here and it's a bit surreal being here now speaking as the mayor of the city of Cape Town. I must also warn you that my mom will be telling everyone she speaks to for at least a month that her son spoke at the LSE. So thank you very much, Professor, for at least giving her that. The fact that you've come this evening to listen to a mayor from a city 12,000 kilometers away tells me that you're interested in what's happening in Cape Town, both for its own sake and for the insights it may offer for South Africa's future and for other fast-growing cities in Africa and around the world. I suspect that you, like me, are interested in working models that can be applied to the issues of poverty and inequality that concern all of us. The LSE's motto and purpose is to understand the causes of things for the betterment of society. That captures extremely well my own search for meaning and purpose, and the strong sense that I have in my work as mayor that I can do something useful beyond myself. I'm very motivated by that, and I believe deeply that it is at the intersection of politics and economics, if both are done well, that you can achieve real social progress. And the achievement of social progress, the improvement in the quality of life of people, particularly those living in poverty, to me is the very point of government and of economics. I define politics as the attainment of government power for the purpose of social progress. And economics, as we know, spends much time on theories of development and models for how to get economies to grow. And at the intersection of those two, you can really make a difference in the world. In Cape Town, I'm applying myself in an environment that is extremely difficult, trying to make the economic models come to life with the single goal of lifting people out of poverty over time. And I must say, this is a very fun and meaningful and exciting thing to do, which is why I'm enjoying it so much 2 years in. Finally, I know that there are very rare youthful voices in politics today, especially in South Africa. So hopefully I can bring a slightly more youthful perspective to South Africa's and Cape Town's prospects this evening. Now, I fear some who are not South African or who are less familiar with my country may carry some misconceptions. If you rely only on the international media, you would be forgiven for thinking that things are going very badly in South Africa indeed. You may feel that there's only a negative story to tell, or that the story is only one of a failing national government making increasingly inexplicable choices. But in truth, South Africa is a country that defies superficial global news coverage and has always defied the pessimism that has accompanied it over decades. South Africa really is a country that creeps into your heart and stays there, as anyone who has visited can attest, or the many South Africans in the room can attest. It isn't just the natural wild beauty or the incredible bushveld, but it is the story of a country trying to overcome the legacy of a painful past and build a truly prosperous future that is shared by all who live in it. This year, as the professor has said, South Africa celebrates our 30th anniversary since the end of apartheid and the transition to democracy in 1994. And we celebrate this, I think, in the best possible style and the most appropriate style by holding a democratic election, something that was not possible 31 years ago. I was just 7 years old, living with my single mom in Cape Town's northern suburb of Edgemead, when our country had its first real democratic election in '94. I was too young to fully grasp the importance of that event, but aware enough to know that it was a really big moment. In fact, one of my earliest conscious memories is of watching Nelson Mandela's inauguration on our TV. Now, this year, we will hold our 7th democratic election since the end of apartheid. And this will be by far the most significant and seminal election since that first one. Later on, as a younger teenager and political organizer on campus and in the streets, there was really never any question about who would win national elections or what the outcome would be. The only question in South African politics would be how big the governing party's majority would be. But for the first time now, the result of this election is not certain. And there is at least a very real prospect, what we economists may call a non-trivial probability, that there will be a change in national government. And this probability grows when you see that for the first time there is a convening, a coalescence of sorts of opposition parties under the banner of the Moonshot Pact. All of this makes for a fascinating election. In fact, Professor Hall, the economist tells me that 4 billion people around the world will go to the polls in 2024 in 64 national elections, including across the pond in America, where I've just come from. And I must say, I'm still tempted to say that ours is going to be the most important. It's certainly going to be the most interesting. In reflecting on our 30th anniversary of democracy, there's of course much to praise about South Africa today, and much to count as real success. South Africa is an indescribably better place than it was under apartheid. The fact that tens of millions of citizens will vote this year, who would not have been allowed even to be called citizens in the past, says it all. Recently, the experience of one brave journalist in South Africa showed how strong some of our democratic institutions still are, despite years of assault. A powerful former president of our country, Jacob Zuma, tried to muzzle and intimidate a well-known journalist called Karen Maughan, who had written extensively about his wrongdoings and exposed some of his corruption. The former president abused the legal process to sue and even attempted to prosecute this journalist for her writing, if not to shut her up, then to bankrupt her with legal bills. But I felt truly proud as a South African to see how the free press, even competitor newspapers and competitor journalists and editors, defended Karen Maughan loudly. And through it all, there was a real sense in the country, I'm sure the South Africans here felt it too, that there was never any doubt that our courts would reject the clear abuse of the legal process by the powerful, and they did, when they emphatically dismissed all of Zuma's phony petitions. That is a good sign of a robust democracy. However, there are also signs of failure in our 30-year review. Much of the data on human development in South Africa is sadly headed in the wrong direction. Unemployment is climbing, poverty is getting worse, not better, life expectancy has begun to slip in the last few years, and crime is an ever-present torment on the minds of every family, and particularly poor families. Essential services on which the poor depend every day are all showing signs of collapse. The state cannot provide enough electricity, leading to daily blackouts that we euphemistically call load shedding. Trains don't run, with the number of passenger journeys having collapsed more than 95%. Imagine if 95% of trains didn't run in London. This has locked people into the apartheid spatial legacy that still defines most of our cities in South Africa and cuts them off from job opportunities. As all of these governance failures mount, they are added on top of the still very present legacy of the past, and so the pressure in our society grows. Ours is a society still deeply scarred by the past. The spatial and economic legacy of apartheid is etched into the landscape of every town and city across the country. We are very much still a nation of economic insiders and outsiders. And for the outsiders, life can be harsh. Even living in the city with the best prospects in the country doesn't always feel that way when your own life is a daily battle. Just before I left to come on this trip, I spent an evening doing a safety patrol with the neighborhood watch volunteers in a neighborhood of Khayelitsha, which is a large township in Cape Town. These volunteers, 40 or 50 of them, spend each and every evening walking the streets to provide a visible deterrent to criminals and to keep their neighbors safe. They walk particularly around the bus and taxi terminus, because street thieves especially prey on those coming home from work in the evening, knowing that they are more likely to be carrying cash or cell phones. These are incredible community-minded people. But what really struck me when we sat down to speak with one another at the end of our patrol together, what really struck me was not crime-related, but it was that not a single one of them had a job. One of the volunteers is an elderly man who had his foot crushed by a gate in a work accident, and now he walks with a permanent hobble. But besides him, all of the rest of those volunteers were younger people, some young mothers with kids of their own, some young men, but all without any income besides the little that comes from the state. For as long as these young people and the nearly 11 million other unemployed people in our country feel that there is little prospect of a better future for them, South Africa cannot possibly claim that we have made the best use of these 3 decades. So long as poverty deepens, so too will South Africa's politics fray, and voters will be pushed to the fringes, where peddlers of the politics of division and hate lie waiting, biding their time. And for us true believers in the precepts of liberal democracy and the power of liberal democracy to generate human progress at scale, the soil is getting more and more rocky. That is the scale of our challenge, and I feel it very personally. I have defined our mission in Cape Town as being a city of hope, the topic of our discussion this evening. By this, I mean a city that offers a living demonstration of slowly but surely achieving social progress. One that lifts more people out of poverty over time. And most importantly, which demonstrates that forward progress towards the promise of 1994 is still possible in South Africa. And so this has become my mantra and the mantra of the administration I lead in Cape Town. We will judge our progress by the progress of the most vulnerable in the city. We will judge our service delivery successes by the services to its poorest communities. And we will judge the inclusiveness of our city by the extent to which our local economy is creating more work for more people. That's what we mean by a city of hope, a place where even the poorest can realistically envisage a better future for themselves and their families with more dignity and more opportunities in life. I am incredibly proud to represent a city that is showing that this vision is still possible in South Africa. Cape Town today is so much more than just a beautiful global tourist destination, although it is, of course, definitely that too. We've become an economic giant of Southern Africa. We are the home address for tech and innovation on the entire continent, with more than double the number of tech startups in Cape Town than in Lagos and Nairobi combined. We're leading the green economy charge and the drive for renewable energy. We're a city of commerce, of manufacturing, of financial services. Our skyline is now dotted with construction cranes, the signs of a lively economy and a bullish outlook. We're the sports and events capital of Southern Africa. Cape Town is a city of art and music and flavors and wine and history, politics and culture, and of course of unmatched natural beauty, of international film shoots and tech startups and multinational corporation head offices. All of these things make Cape Town a fantastic place to visit and invest in, and they help cement our place as one of the great cities of the world. In fact, just before I came here this evening, I hope you've seen the CNN and Time Out magazine that ranks New York as the greatest city in the world this afternoon and Cape Town at number 2. I will say London was able to sneak in there at number 4, but Cape Town's right up there at number 2. All of this is great. But for me, Cape Town's biggest achievement isn't in all of those points. It actually lies in showing that there is an alternative path available to South Africa. Cape Town is bucking the national trend. Rather than stagger from crisis to crisis, Cape Town is gearing itself for the future. And it is a future brimming with hopefulness and progress. We're not merely talking about a different way of doing things. We've had a long enough stint at the wheel to show clear evidence that a different approach to governing the city can lead to fundamentally different outcomes. Cape Town has pulled clear ahead on every single metric, from access to basic services for the poor, to resident satisfaction, from new infrastructure investment and economic investment, to jobs numbers. We've just celebrated 6 straight quarters of positive jobs growth. In the most recent quarter, more new jobs were created in Cape Town than in all of South Africa's other major cities combined. Jobs numbers are often cold. But recently, a lady called Marissa from a really tough neighborhood in Cape Town called Delft. She called in to speak to me when I was on a radio show, one of the regular radio shows that I do when the public can phone in. She told me such a heartwarming story. She said she had never had a job before in her life. She was over 30 years in age. But she had just got her first job and was calling into the radio to celebrate. I could hear the emotion trembling in her voice. And knowing that that job would help not just her, but her whole family, what it would mean for her community, made all of those cold jobs data so much more meaningful to me. There are 205,000 new jobs, many working for the first time, like Marissa, in Cape Town this year. We've also just celebrated record overseas visitor numbers, 2.9 million overseas visitors last year, promising even better jobs data ahead. But I mention all of this not merely to impress, but because I believe that from all of these efforts, and of course our errors in Cape Town, we can distill some lessons for the next 3 decades of South Africa's future. I want to share with you today 5 differentiators to our approach to governance, which taken together explain why Cape Town is outperforming other cities in South Africa. I consider these 5 approaches universal truths, applicable to the governance of any town, city, province, or even country. And I have no doubt that their application in the running of cities elsewhere, and indeed in the running of our country, would in time deliver the same improved results we are seeing in Cape Town today. These would be my lessons. The first lesson would be that you must have a clear and bold sense of national ambition, something that you are unambiguously aiming for, and everyone has to know it. Perhaps this lesson is best illustrated with a simple question to all of the South Africans in the room. What is South Africa aiming for today? None of us can compellingly answer that question, and certainly no one in the national government can. I'm saddened when I see that so many South Africans have actually acclimatized to worsening conditions in South Africa and have begun to accept them as the new normal. There's a growing belief that the failure of the state is inevitable, that the scale of what needs fixing is insurmountable. I refuse to believe that. In Cape Town, we refuse to believe that. We want Cape Town to show that no one in South Africa, no one, need accept that our country now only has a reverse gear and that decline is inevitable or irreversible. It isn't. Instead, we should all lift our ambitions, lift our gaze, and unashamedly aim for excellence and progress. That is not to say that we do not have massive challenges to overcome or that our progress will always be linear. But I hope that every resident of Cape Town feels and knows over time that they live in a place that is not simply satisfied to bumble along, but rather a city that is determined to make the decisions and choices now to deliver meaningful social progress in the future. Our second lesson is that in order to actually deliver progress, you must build a merit-based state. This may sound perplexingly obvious, but the South African example is proof of how easily aspirations of power and control can trump the needs of citizens and the ability of their state to meet those needs. Our national government has made no secret of its ambition to erase the line between party and state, and to then co-opt the entire state machinery. Almost 27 years ago, they adopted the policy of cadre deployment and unashamedly stated that the intention was to control all levers of power through the deployment of party loyalists. This is not some nebulous accusation. It is a fact, publicly acknowledged. The results these past 3 decades, as also concluded last year in a Harvard report that was widely publicized, have been nothing short of disastrous, as the capacity of the state to deliver basic services has been eroded from the inside out. Every state entity, government department, and local municipality has become increasingly dysfunctional and vastly overstaffed as the practice of rewarding loyalists with positions became a monster that needed constant feeding. In Cape Town, we have actively depoliticized the civil service and brought back the notion of a public service as an excellent career option for talented and ambitious candidates, regardless of their political persuasion. It's a long process because the stigma of the inefficient state is not always easy to shake off, but it's an absolutely essential part of turning any government around. And it also becomes self-fulfilling, which is where we are now in Cape Town. As the reputation of a city or a government as a place of excellence grows, so too does the caliber of candidates that it can attract. Today, Cape Town is considered a highly desirable government to work for, and we are able to fill positions with people of outstanding excellence in their fields. State officials must know that their career advancement depends only on the professional value that they add, and not on their political loyalties. This is the only way that the capacity of the state can be rebuilt. I cannot stress enough how important this lesson is. My third lesson is that long-term success requires the devolution of powers away from the center, down to energetic local and provincial governments. I think it's a universal democratic truth that government functions should best reside closest to the people who benefit from them when they work well and suffer from them when they fail. In that way, there's much more democratic accountability for the proper exercise of those powers, and in turn, better outcomes. Perhaps most specifically to South Africa, this also means local governments can act to protect their residents from the consequences of national failures, which impact their daily lives. I have no doubt that cities everywhere have to grapple from time to time, as I heard this afternoon from the Mayor of London, Mayor Khan. He also shares the frustration of a national government that doesn't always cooperate or underperforms. And this is the case across lots and lots of cities around the world. In South Africa, our constitution makes theoretical provision for federalism, but local governments have, until now, not explored the full extent and scope of what those powers allow for. But now, because of the failure of those national services, we are aggressively asserting the width and breadth of our local powers and deliberately testing the definition of those powers to their maximum. We're doing this especially in energy supply, policing, in passenger rail, because these are 3 areas of profound pressure and failure that have the biggest daily impact on poor residents in particular, and on our ability to grow the economy. I call this functional federalism, by which we increasingly push for and take on duties that test the limits or may even go beyond the scope of our current mandate, but which we have no choice to do to protect our residents. This has seen us embark on a mission to shield Cape Town from the failure of Eskom, which is the national power utility in South Africa. We're buying renewable and dispatchable energy from private energy producers. We're helping thousands of households and businesses generate their own rooftop power through solar investment, and we're purchasing that excess power back from them through a feed-in tariff. We've enabled the wheeling of electricity across our grid by third-party users, and we're about to start a voluntary incentive program to reduce demand. So while we haven't taken over the function of Eskom altogether, we have taken many steps to start reducing our reliance on them. Cape Town now has the lowest number and duration of blackouts, and we will keep lowering these still until they're gone completely. And in doing so, a very important benefit of this program is that we are leading in the effort to reduce our use of fossil fuel power and rely much more on renewables. Similarly, we've refused to accept that inordinately high levels of violent crime in South Africa, caused by the under-resourcing of the South African police forces, is something that is beyond our scope to do anything about. We have to do what we can with what we have where we are. The police in South Africa are a purely national function, managed entirely by the national government. But cities are allowed to have metropolitan police services with limited powers of enforcement and very limited, if any, powers of investigation. In Cape Town, we have used these limited resources and proscribed powers to focus our efforts in the worst crime-ridden communities, to boost visible policing there with tremendous early success. While violent crime stats remain far too high in Cape Town, of course, they're actually ticking in the right direction, and we're showing the only working model in the country. Our current battle now is to devolve real investigative powers to our city police so that they can help bring winnable cases to court and not see arrested criminals returning straight back to the streets. And then there is the all-important issue of passenger rail in Cape Town. Under management of the National Railways Utility, as I said, passenger journeys in South Africa have collapsed by 95%. With those hundreds of thousands of train commuters in Cape Town now forced onto the roads in overburdened buses and taxis. The benefits of resurrecting this service are immense, both in unstitching the legacy of apartheid in our cities and to the economic health of our city. And we're going to keep pushing until the running of passenger rail is devolved to be a function of the city, as it should have been all along. So this is what we mean when we talk about pushing for additional powers to be moved from the center down to the city so that we can build resilience and protect residents. My fourth lesson is the importance of future-proofing through infrastructure investment. The state of many South African cities and towns today is a lesson in what happens when you forego the maintenance of infrastructure or neglect to allocate enough budget to the expansion of new infrastructure. In many places across South Africa, that future has sadly already arrived, and towns are faced with infrastructure that is creaking and services that are breaking. We have vowed that this would never be allowed to happen to Cape Town. And as a result, we have become obsessed with the future and with making plans to ensure that we are ready for that future as soon as possible. Cape Town is now a city of 5 million people. We're either just about to or have already overtaken Johannesburg as South Africa's most populous city. With our rates of urbanization and semigration from other parts of the country only speeding up, ours will be a city of close to 10 million people within a generation. Rather than be terrified by this prospect, we have decided to meet it head on, and we are now rolling out the biggest infrastructure investment pipeline of any city in South Africa. Such is the scale of our program that over the next 3 years, we are going to outspend and outinvest South Africa's other two biggest cities, Johannesburg and Durban, combined. The lion's share of this spending will go to upgraded and new sewage infrastructure, which delivers immediate dignity and quality of life improvements for so many residents, especially in poorer communities. As more and more people see for themselves a viable future in Cape Town, and as our city continues to grow rapidly, we are determined to turn that growth to our advantage by being well prepared for it. My fifth and final lesson speaks to a distinct philosophical difference between our city government's approach to beating poverty and the approach followed elsewhere. Here I refer to the power of growth versus the siren call of redistribution. Whether you're dealing with revenue generated from municipal rates and tariffs, like we are, or revenue from national taxation, the principle is the same. A low growth economy with a shrinking revenue base is not compatible with growing redistributive measures. If you want to do more for the poor, as we must, and you want to invest in more infrastructure and expand public transport and have more police officers on the ground and much more besides, then you must have growth to pay for it all. The way to beat poverty is through growth. But in the short-termism of politics, and with the very real scale of the need all around us, the temptation is always to invest in new or bigger redistributive programs. This siren call must be carefully balanced for long-term success. There is what I see as a facile debate in economics about the virtues of focusing on economic growth. But in the context of tiny pools of taxpayers, South Africa has 5 million taxpayers and 60 million citizens. You can't grow revenues to do more for the poor unless you are growing the economy. In South Africa, state revenues have stagnated over the last decade, and with them has stagnated the ability to do more for the poor. In Cape Town, we have grown revenues and have consistently grown our redistributive programs without the need to overburden taxpayers by focusing on growing the local economy. This allows us to run the most redistributive government in South Africa. A full 75% of our budget and infrastructure investment is spent on poorer residents or in poorer communities. That is why our biggest obsession in Cape Town is to fling open the doors of the city and declare ourselves open for business and investment. We're doing everything we possibly can to make Cape Town the easiest place on the African continent to do business. And we treat business owners, entrepreneurs, and investors as the poverty-beating, job-creating heroes that they are. Much of my time this last week in Washington and New York, and now here in London, was spent delivering this very message, sharing Cape Town's good story, and telling an eager and interested audience just why Cape Town is a good bet for the future. That approach is the only way to help lift people out of poverty and create a sustainable future for cities. And it goes a long way towards explaining why Cape Town's real unemployment rate is a full 15 percentage points lower than the national figure. Those who still treat private enterprise as an ideological enemy, who overregulate, control, and strangle the economy, cannot possibly solve South Africa's challenges of economic exclusion and poverty. Cape Town is determined to show the only way that it can be done. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of my 5 lessons for governing a rapidly growing city. There are, of course, many more things I could have touched on. Respect for public money, the value of transparency, the willingness to embrace new innovations, the power of partnerships with communities. The list could be endless. But if you were to focus on these 5 areas, having a clear sense of shared ambition that everyone in your city or country understands, building a merit-based state, fighting for the devolution of powers to insulate yourself from state failure, investing to future-proof your city through infrastructure, and understanding the power of growth to help fund redistribution, I believe you will have laid the foundations for a successful city anywhere. We can all agree that for Africa to succeed, and so many of Africa's cities are even faster urbanizing than Cape Town is, and for many millions of people in those cities to be lifted out of poverty, these cities must succeed. I love how Professor Ed Glaser puts it. I know of no pathway from poverty to prosperity that does not run through city streets. To succeed, these cities will need stronger local powers, growing local economies, competent merit-based administrations, and clear ambition and vision. In this way, we can build a more prosperous Africa. I say this not in the blind belief in a particular approach to governance, but from a position of proof. After more than a decade of trying, Cape Town has now covered enough ground following this approach to start showing meaningful differences in outcomes. And in a year when South Africans go to the polls to make a choice about the future, these differences in outcomes could prove to be critical. As I said at the start, this year's election is a big deal. The biggest election since I watched that inauguration as a 7-year-old boy. Because for the first time in 30 years, the outcome is genuinely in doubt. It is not inconceivable that South Africa will experience its first democratic change of government in 3 decades, something that will be tremendously positive for our young democracy and its next 30 years of maturation. This makes the work that we do and the successes we achieve in the city of Cape Town all the more meaningful. And so our mission is to build a city of hope, not just a city of hope for Cape Townians, but a city of hope for all South Africans, a demonstration that decline does not have to be inevitable, that it is not irreversible, and that 30 years on, the dream of 1994 is not dead, that a better future is indeed possible for everyone, and we are showing how possible it is. Thank you very much for having me here.
Got 5 minutes to respond to that tour de force. Thank you to the Honourable Mayor, Geordin Hill-Lewis, for his speech. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome him to London. And we are honoured to host you in our city and at the LSE today. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at the Firoz Lalji Institute for Africa, as well as LSE Cities, and to Prof. Susie Hall and the School of Public Policy for organising today's event. It's really good to see so many of our students here and so many South Africans. Cape Town is one of the world's most iconic cities, and almost every global traveller has got Cape Town on their bucket list for its beauty and its dynamism. I was born in Johannesburg, though, and the constant rivalry you have between New York and San Francisco, London and Edinburgh, Shanghai and Beijing also plays out in Johannesburg versus Cape Town. I was fortunate, though, to live in Cape Town in my early 20s for 2 years, and I can assure you there is nothing more fun than living in Cape Town as a young person. I have many fond memories of nighttime beach parties in Camps Bay, fish and chips at the V&A, and the bohemian coffee shops of Long Street and Noordhoek. But I've also been there for business as I've gotten older and spoiled by the incredible settings for conferences, with easy access to places of outstanding natural beauty like Stellenbosch and French Hook. Cape Town is a significant contribution to South Africa's GDP. Mayor, we can discuss the figures, but I think it's roughly 15 to 20%, and that is largely in tourism, energy, the agricultural sector, and of course our world-famous Pinotage wines. A world-class university in UCT, a dynamic tech and financial services sector, as the Mayor said, fintech is really exciting in Cape Town, and these all combine to put the city as a forefront to the South African economy and a challenger to Johannesburg, where most of economic activity happens. But as the Mayor has pointed out a few times, we must not forget the urban poor. South Africa remains one of the most unequal countries in the world. Only Namibia has got a higher Gini coefficient for students of economics in the room, and the squatter camps, as the Mayor has mentioned, or informal settlements, as you call them here, places like Khayelitsha, Langa, Mitchell's Plain, where daily life remains a struggle, in stark contrast to what you'll see if you go to Cape Town as a tourist. And in fact, most tourists will only see that reality of the city as you fly over those places when you approach the airport from the outskirts of the city. And people are often shocked to see how much people do suffer in South Africa. And this will put the prosperity that the Mayor mentions at risk, because high crime remains a persistent problem in Cape Town. It's got the world's 12th highest homicide rate. I checked today, and that's only after places like Mexico and Colombia. Cape Town has, though, delivered many more, much more for poor South Africans and middle-class South Africans, more than any other municipality, constantly leading in employment, education. I saw the matric results came out. Best learners are always in the Western Cape, and service delivery has been really, really commendable compared to the need we see in other places in South Africa. So before I begin this next part, and I'd love for us to get into the election in the discussion, I must point out that I am non-partisan, so I don't support the Democratic Alliance or the African National Congress. For those who are not South Africans, that's the ruling party. And I'm a firm believer in pluralism and that South Africa needs a strong opposition like the Democratic Alliance to keep its civil society and its policy space thriving. And only when an opposition works effectively with the government can we get policy together to deliver for people. That said, the Democratic Alliance has got many policy interventions like the ones the Mayor mentioned that are sorely needed as they address the issues that face not only his constituency in the Western Cape, but the whole country. The DA will probably win the Western Cape in this year's general election, but if they want to perform well nationally, they must appeal to the country's poor. It cannot rely on bashing the ANC, and it needs to be a champion for the poor, not just the middle class. Pro-poor policies have to be more radical and they have to be front and center. The business policies are very commendable. We need to be open for business, but the issue of poverty will always constrain our ambitions in that area. South Africa's got a very robust and lively politics. So my memory of the very first democratic election, which is 30 years ago, is when I saw my own parents vote for the first time. That is a very profound thing to experience. And I cannot impress on you how difficult the early 90s were to get there. And globalization, seeing the country change, many strides were made, but the transition to democracy has not delivered for everyone. Many Black people are still angry because they're still poor. And a criticism that is leveled at the DA is that it's predominantly white and middle class, or supported by the emerging Black middle class. Some of the older generation will never vote for the Democratic Alliance, but some of them will not vote for the ANC either, because the ruling party has been very adept at enriching its leaders over the past few years. Now, South Africans like to be exceptional, and they like to think that South Africa is like the worst place on the planet. But as a political analyst, I actually see a lot of similarities between a complacent ruling party, the African National Congress, and the Conservative Party here, where you also see cadre deployment. Both leaders of the ruling parties are multimillionaires. There's something wrong with global politics. So if the Democratic Alliance, as I said, does not put pro-poor policies at the center of its election campaign, urban and spatial development, its political gains will not be sustainable. I would also like to see a lot more in climate change, adaptation and resilience. The cities proved particularly vulnerable, almost ran out of water a couple of years ago. Al Gore always mentions Cape Town when he does his scary climate change forecasting. And the economic policy of South Africa, so now I want to kind of talk to this framing that Susie's talked here in relation to other African cities, because the economic policy of South Africa is still very much to position itself as a gateway to Africa. Cape Town is a magnet for young people due to its relatively low unemployment rate to the rest of South Africa. Youth unemployment in South Africa is at 60%. That is a lot. But economic opportunities are more plentiful in Cape Town than in other parts of South Africa. So the rest of the continent and other parts of South Africa will migrate to Cape Town. I read David Pilling's written from the Financial Times, has written a really good summary of the mayor. I spoke to David, I was like, what should I ask him? And he said, I'm going to write an article. So it's very good and sums up some of the ideas quite well. So the city, when I lived in Cape Town, I found that the city was a hub for people from other parts of Africa, especially Angola, because Cape Town's on the west coast of South Africa. So you have people coming via Namibia, but also from further fields like Senegal and Congo. I'll be finished soon. It's important to remember that the younger generation of South Africans identify more as African in a way that previous generations did not. And cultural ties like Afrobeat mashups between Nigerian shoki and South African amapiano have built a formidable cultural solidarity. On a young continent, Mayor, your youth is your strength, but you'll have to reimagine politics for new forms of hyperlocal formations and economic configurations that arise from the technical innovations you've mentioned, the social entrepreneurship in the sleeping giant of a continent that is incubating. How Cape Town sets itself up as a city with an African identity in the face of its urban development will be fascinating to watch in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm not too sure. Is this working? Can you hear me at the back? Okay, so we've had 2 fantastic talks, a great response. Thank you very much. Questions of what we do with a city that's profoundly young, with incredibly high levels of unemployment. Questions of what we do about the great economic divides that pervade and really still very much etched into the kind of landscape of racial apartheid. So the economic logics keep that intact. But also high levels of imagination around, although you kind of negated going towards a redistributive politics, I thought that you showed so much imagination around that, talking about sewage, talking about rail, talking about the bread and butter of life that makes a difference for people. So let's open to the floor. Just to reiterate, we'll take about 3 questions at a time. There's a roving mic that's going to be going around. Emily, when you're ready and you want to add in, we'll take a couple of questions from online as well. When you ask your question, if you could just tell us your name and any affiliation that you might have. And please restrict yourself to 1 question and don't deliver a speech, just ask a question. Thanks very much. So I've got 1 hand up there, 1 here, and then I promise you I'll get to the sides. Okay, so we've got 3 here. Oops, actually.
Thanks for speaking here. I'm Renee McFarlane. I'm from South Africa. I'm currently doing a PhD in education at King's College. And I really enjoyed listening to what you have to say. You made a point about greater devolution and situating power closer to people it affects, which I guess as an idea is quite appealing in the South African context. Though some would argue that greater devolution in situations of high inequality actually entrenches inequality. So my question is, given the huge challenges that local governments all over the country faces, is greater devolution to the municipal level really the DA's main proposal on local government reform to solve our local government challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take 2 more. So we had 2 up front here, and then we'll go to the sides, I promise. The gentleman with the scarf and the gentleman. Thank you.
Thanks. I just introduced myself. So I'm part of the DA abroad. We're having election registration Saturday, but it's just as you said, it's for everyone to go and register and make sure your vote counts in 2024 for democracy in South Africa. And my question is, you know, Jordan mentioned his mum, so proud of him being here. My mum played a big role in Pietermaritzburg, getting me to school. And I think my question is like the power of women leadership in South Africa.
I'll endorse that one. Please.
Hi, Jordan. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Kobus van Rooyen. I did my PhD in urban complexity, focused on socioeconomic segregation in Cape Town. So, I mean, a while back you shared the infrastructure report, the mayoral report, with your critical areas being energy, water, sanitation, housing. I see these as systemic problems. They're obviously all interconnected, and I was just wondering if the city also sees it that way and, you know, face a problem that way and look for solutions in a similar manner.
Yeah. Okay. Professor, I just wanted to respond to something that you said as well, to say I'm certainly not negating redistributive policies. I'm making an argument for how to pay for them better. If you prefer redistributive policies over investment too much, then you end up with no money in the medium term to do any redistribution. And that's basically precisely the problem that places like Johannesburg are now in. They have fast declining budgets because there's such infrastructure problem and economic trouble that businesses and homeowners are fleeing. And at a city level, that's your tax base. So that's the point I was making. Then, thank you, Dr. McFarland. I don't think that perhaps you can just make a quick point about how you think devolution entrenches inequality. So if we have greater capacity in Cape Town, the biggest beneficiary of that devolution is going to be poor residents and unemployed residents in Cape Town. That's going to lower inequality dramatically in Cape Town and contribute to lowering it nationally as well. It may, in a sense, create some kind of inequity between Cape Town and other cities, but that, I hope, provides a democratic incentive for those cities and residents there to reform and to improve their performance. But you cannot argue that cities should hold back their greater capacity to improve the lives of the poor in their cities because not all other cities are able to do the same. That would, I don't think that would hold water. So I'm not suggesting that those powers should be devolved for all cities everywhere. I think it should be devolved where cities have demonstrated capacity to deliver. I think you are right that the state of local government in South Africa, as a general statement, is so concerning that if you were to devolve powers uniformly in a kind of homogeneous way, you might actually get worse outcomes, even worse outcomes. I think that's a very good point. There are 66, for those who don't know, there's roughly 270 local municipalities in South Africa. 66 of them are classified as being so dysfunctional that they cannot even deliver basic services anymore. They can't pay their staff. So if you were to devolve to those 66, it would be a catastrophe. I'm saying that there would need to be a differentiated devolution to those that have demonstrated capacity. And so I think that is a very attractive offer for reform in local government, because we are saying we may not be able to fix every problem at a national level yet. There's political change coming, and hopefully sooner rather than later. But what you can do is use the capacity where you have to do something to fix public services so that the poor can benefit from those and address inequality in that way. To the gentleman from DA Abroad, I didn't get your name, sir. Basil, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for the work that you do. But I think it's more of a comment. I owe a great deal to the values instilled in me by my mum. She is a nurse and a single mother, and I owe her a lot. And I think that more women in position of leadership can only do our society a great deal of good. Quibus, a fascinating area of study. Quibus referred to the infrastructure report that we've released. For those of you interested in more detail on infrastructure, all of you rushing to download it, I know. We have published a detailed infrastructure report which goes into a lot of area-based detail, project-based detail, not just for this year, but for the next 10 years ahead. It's a first for South Africa to publish that level of detail on our infrastructure plans. And you can download that on our website, and please do if that's something that interests you. I do think, Quibus, that they are interconnected. Absolutely. I mean, the way in which we are trying to invest in affordable accommodation, for example, addresses the fact that South African cities are still largely defined by apartheid planning and disconnectedness. Makes it easier to invest in public transport because you get the density along key transit routes that you need to make public transport viable, and connects people closer to work opportunities. So all of these projects are absolutely connected. For the work that we're doing in the sewer space, for example, many of those outlying parts of the city have got sewage infrastructure that was installed decades ago and cannot keep pace with the number of people that now live there and is under tremendous pressure. We're going in and upgrading 200 kilometers of new, bigger sewer pipeline this year alone, and much more besides. And that's interconnected. You've got huge infrastructure projects delivering growth and investment in communities that haven't traditionally enjoyed it. You've got much better quality of life and dignity for people with much more reliable services. And there's a whole lot of ancillary benefits to that as well. So there's definitely connection through those infrastructure programs. Thanks.
Thank you. So I just want to shift to that side to make sure I'm not leaving people out. Gentleman who's got his hand up, there's one at the back as well. Let's take two there.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. My name's Letugusle. I'm from Johannesburg. You mentioned the Harvard report that recently came out, and one of the biggest issues they said to solve in South Africa was the issue of spatial exclusion in our cities and just everywhere in the country. But you also mentioned that redistributive policies are not necessarily the way to go about fixing those. How then do you think Cape Town as a city is addressing them through their strategies? And you also spoke of almost like a bottom-up approach to solving the problems. How does the city strategy also extend to fixing those problems without any forms of redistribution?
There was a question at the back as well. There's a hand at the back. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Daniela Maldonado. I'm doing my master's in social innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm from Colombia. And I would like to understand since on the fifth part of your strategy, you mentioned about growth and how opportunities should be fostered. I very much like to understand what's the strategy and how the city is bringing innovation and entrepreneurship into the capabilities of the citizens to develop growth, business, and opportunities.
Thank you.
And then here we are, question from the gentleman in the front. Thank you.
My name is Varun. Thank you, Mayor, for the excellent talk.
There we go.
Yeah. My question is really around housing. If Cape Town is such a magnet for national and continental inflow migration, I see that the writing on the wall is that it's going to create a lot of pressures on housing, and I see you nodding there. So it's an issue that cities from my home in Canada are facing, including Vancouver and Toronto. So I'm wondering how you are thinking about it and how your colleagues in Joburg or Durban are thinking about it as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Letugusle. Let me just speak about this concept of being able to pay for redistributive policies. The City of Cape Town runs the most redistributive government in South Africa. 75% of our tax revenue that we earn from ratepayers in Cape Town is cross-subsidized to poorer communities for basic services and infrastructure in those communities. That's the most redistributive. The point I was making was how you do more of that is by focusing on growing the economy. If you get the balance wrong and focus too much on more and more redistributive policies and not enough infrastructure investment, then what happens over time is that your revenues as a city collapse and you've got nothing left to do anything. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, the crisis that Johannesburg is in right now, in that when you get business and residents leaving the city, your tax revenues collapse because cities raise their revenue of property taxes. And when your revenues collapse, you can't do anything. You can't fix the infrastructure and you can't redistribute at all. And so that's the point I was making. So we are trying to address that mainly, and this goes to Barun's question as well. We are trying to address that mainly through a couple of really exciting housing programs that we are working on. This gets a little bit kind of housing policy wonkish if there's any housing specialists in the room, but we're working on a program called small-scale rental units, which allows people who own properties in townships or in well-located parts of the city close to economic opportunities to build 3 or 4 or sometimes even 6 or 8 additional units on their property with very minimal planning requirements. We are drawing up pro forma, off-the-shelf, pre-approved building plans for them so that they can go through it really quickly, and to free up additional accommodation close to work opportunities at an affordable rate. And that actually has the potential, to your question as well, I think it was Barun, to deliver many more new and affordable housing units than the state ever can, acting as a delivery agent itself. The states in Cape Town, for example, I can't speak for the entire state, but we can, if we really hit our straps and spend every cent of our budget, we can deliver about 3,000 units of government housing, free housing a year. That is not even enough to cover 1 month of additional demand of people moving into the city. So the pace of urbanization is far quicker. You've got to be able to rely on some mode of delivery in the private sector to deliver more affordable accommodation and to deal with the spatial exclusion that you're talking about. And of course, when you get that investment, you also get, again, additional revenues with which to support the poor. So, for example, in South Africa, you won't believe it if you know that South Africa does not have enough electricity for everyone, but it also has extremely high electricity prices. And the only city in the country this last year that actually decreased the price of the subsidized rate for the poorest residents, what we call our lifeline tariff, was Cape Town. The only way that we're able to afford to do that, that's quite a big subsidy, and to you as well, let's go clear, that's quite a big subsidy. The only way we're able to afford to do that is through that virtuous cycle of investment, delivering additional income, allowing you to spend more on the poor. That in turn brings more investment and addresses inequality. One of the other ways that we are doing it, to go to, I think it was Daniela's question, is to try and get South Africans to be more comfortable with the, excuse me, Daniela, there, to be more comfortable with the informal economy. I haven't yet traveled to Colombia. I'd love to visit there. But if you go to developing world countries and cities and you travel to South African cities, one thing that you will notice, and the Harvard report makes this point, you will have seen it, is how small our informal economy is. And it's really flummoxed researchers for a long time that South Africa has such a small informal economy. And part of the reason is that residents are quite hostile to informal traders in South African cities. They don't really want them. It's kind of a form of NIMBYism. And one of the things we've tried to do is try to change that perception in Cape Town, to try and make it more welcoming to micro entrepreneurs who want to start a business to make ends meet and want to start up somewhere in the city and get a permit to do so. We've made that permitting process completely online. It's free to get a permit. They don't have to pay anything to get a permit. We've tried to add much more permitted spaces around the city to make it easier for them. And then, of course, I think on the total other end of the spectrum from the informal economy, the kind of high-tech innovation economy, is the great relationship that we have with 3 world-class universities in the city. The University of Cape Town, the University of the Western Cape, and the University of Stellenbosch, and a great technical university, the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Those 4 universities really provide a great pipeline of tech and innovation skills in the city, which has helped. I'd love to take credit for it, but I think they actually deserve the most credit for making it the home address for tech in Africa. More tech firms than Nairobi and Lagos combined in the city because of that pipeline of brilliant skills. Thank you.
Geordin, while you're up there.
Hi, I'm going to abuse my privilege of being on the panel, and I've got 2 very short questions. We've spoken a lot about economic growth, and for people who don't know South Africa that well, and with my economist hat on, South Africa's growth is 1%.
Yeah.
And that's below the global average rate. I was just Googling, the global economy grew 2.5% 2023, and Cape Town as well is sitting at 1%. So, you know, we've been talking about economic growth a lot as a driver for broad-based prosperity, but growth's at 1%. And then data prices are also very expensive for South Africans. So if there's going to be this big telematic, mobile leapfrog, how can we get data prices down? Yeah.
Can I also use my... Just very quickly. And I think because it piggybacks onto this question of if you want to have faith in the market, there's also the requirement to regulate it. So I want to come back to the question of rental housing. And just to say, to draw on the example of London, when you have a combination of your city growing from incredible amount of investment of people coming in to kind of buy up the property stock, and you basically facilitate the private market to be the primary mode of delivery of housing, you end up with the most diabolical, toxic mix of horrendous unaffordability. So when you're giving these individuals the right to increase their property capacity 8-fold, what's the give back? Do you say that you have to have a cap of affordable rental in that gig? Or what kind of conversations do we have with the market to spread the gains over the longer term? And then I promise we'll come to...
We can take one, because that was only 2.
That's 2. So should we take another 2?
Yeah, that's fine.
From the left bank? Oh, and 2 online. Okay, so could we do 2 online, and then we come and we close with you guys with 3 questions. 2 online from Emily.
So the first question is from Emily, an LSE geography alumni. How do you reconcile the flourishing tech industries while also addressing youth employment? Do you think it is the city's responsibility to intervene and ensure that these companies actually provide opportunities for those who need it most? And then the second is from, and I apologize for my pronunciation, Sisole Ngobo, who is a resident of Cape Town, asking what are the plans for the city to address the public transport challenges of 2023. We saw how the city of Cape Town is vulnerable to taxi violence and how this almost brought the city to a standstill.
So the most concerning thing about South Africa's 1% growth rate is that it's much slower than population growth. So per capita GDP is actually going down. People are getting poorer in South Africa and have been for about a decade now. So per capita income in South Africa is lower than it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. And that is of massive concern. The number one, South Africa has actually a wonderful economy, very dynamic, extremely innovative, very solutions-oriented, fantastic entrepreneurs. The number one thing holding back or putting a handbrake on the economy is the national energy crisis, and that is why our singular obsession in Cape Town is to end the energy supply crisis. It is really nearly impossible to run a manufacturing business when you have what we call stage 6 load shedding, which I think is that 6 or 8 hours? 8 hours of no power in every 24-hour period. To run a manufacturing business on the basis of heavy machinery it's not possible in that context. So that is why in Cape Town this is our biggest obsession, is to get rid of that energy crisis. It's a good question. So Cape Town grows faster than the national growth rate by a few basis points, 10 or 20, sometimes 30 basis points, but not double or triple. And it's worried me that we haven't been able to achieve what I call breakout growth. And I think the biggest impediment is energy. I think we are setting ourselves up for a period of breakout growth if we can solve the energy crisis in Cape Town and be properly prepared on the infrastructure front. Then all of the preconditions for growth, much faster growth, are met. I wish I had power to bring data prices down for my own sake, but no, I'm afraid I don't. But data prices are very expensive in South Africa. You're right. I must say we have free Wi-Fi at all of our, or the huge majority of our public buildings. Not quite all of them yet, but the majority of them. And something that really I love to see, and those researchers who spend time in Cape Town townships will see this as well, that whenever you drive past a clinic or a community hall or a community library in particular, you will see a crowd of young people outside hovering around those libraries using our free Wi-Fi, and that's absolutely fine, and I love to see that. I love to see that happening. Then on social housing, or rather on the rental market, I want to talk about another program we have where rentals are kind of permanently in the affordable space called social housing. It's not the small-scale rental unit program that I was talking about earlier. It's a program where we take city-owned land, parcels of land that are in the city center, in well-located parts of the city, and we essentially give that away for free, sometimes a notional amount, to social housing companies, private social housing companies. But the quid pro quo is we also offer them discounted property taxes in perpetuity, and discounted electricity and discounted water. But the quid pro quo is that the rentals stay within a certain band, and currently that band starts at about 700 Rand and goes to about 4,000 Rand, so 35 pounds to what is that, 200 pounds, roughly. That's the band. But let me say the increase in supply in the small-scale rental unit has a profound effect on lowering price. I recently spent some time in a part of the city called Desney. I'm sure you'll be familiar with it. And it's a very, very popular place to live because it's very centrally located next to a central business district, an industrial area, so lots of jobs. And as a result, it is unbelievably dense. And I went into a lady's home. I knocked on the door, and it's what we call in South Africa a shack. It's basically made of corrugated iron, and her entire family home was, quite a lot smaller than the space of this stage, and a city toilet's probably 5 or 6 meters away, but outside, not inside the home. I think she did have electricity, and I asked her, is she renting? She said she is renting. And I asked her, would you mind me asking what you're paying to live here? And she was paying 3,000 Rand a month to live in that informal structure. Now, that lady has got a job. She can afford to pay that rent, but cannot find anything on the rental market that suits her income, and so is actually forced to live in informality. And I've thought a lot about why this is an obvious, massive market failure. Why is and the city must take some responsibility for fixing that, because it is so difficult to build low cost, low income, affordable rental stock. It's far too expensive and takes too long, the permitting process and so on. And that is exactly what we are trying to radically simplify, because in the small scale rental unit segment of the market, that lady and her family could easily go and rent a small scale rental unit for 2,000 Rand a month, bring the price down, and get a formal structure for the first time with a toilet inside, a huge quality of life improvement. So those two tracks, I think, I really am very excited about them. I think they are kind of path leading in South Africa. Then let's go to the online questions. Emily, the tech industry by definition tends to hire fairly high-skilled graduates for obvious reasons. But there is an industry that is flourishing in Cape Town, and that is business process outsourcing, which is employing tens of thousands of people. We are almost monthly welcoming new businesses, many from Britain, many from America, setting up new, usually call centers in Cape Town, always employing unemployed young people, and sometimes without any tertiary qualification, straight out of high school, and getting them into work. We do also in South Africa have a youth employment incentive, which is a state incentive to employ young people, which offers quite an attractive tax break. But that's not offered by the city, that's offered by the national state. Sorry, I should be looking at the camera to talk to you, Emily. And then the resident of Cape Town, I didn't get the name. Great question on public transport. I think the taxi strike just showed how susceptible all public transport is in South Africa to disruption, and why it is so crucial that trains get up and running again. Why it should be an absolute national priority that train usage has collapsed by 95%. So, it only energizes me more to focus on the devolution of passenger rail so that people have got choices. We are rolling out our bus system in Cape Town, and we're extending it to Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain. I hope that you've seen that construction happening right now. It is some way along. But the honest truth is that the bus system is never going to be able to replace the passenger numbers that the trains once did. So if we have to get 900,000, 1 million passengers that used to use the train and no longer can back onto the trains, that's what's going to make the permanent difference for public transport. And this is not only in Cape Town, in Soweto, in Durban, across the country. That is why it's not just a functional, it's not just an outrage of government failure. It has very real, massive consequences for hundreds of thousands of commuters in Cape Town. Thank you.
Thanks, Geordin. We are very, very near the end, but I would really like to give that end of the room a chance. If we could take 2 questions from there. There's a woman at the back.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, thank you so much. I just want to follow up on the housing discussion because I do think it is absolutely critical. Sorry, my name is Anna. I am at UCL studying a master's in urban innovation. So I think you've spoken about a couple of different ways in which the city views housing policy going forward, including the small scale rental sector, which I think is so exciting, social housing, and I think there was also an allusion to inclusionary housing and that kind of response. My question is, given the fiscal constraints that you've discussed and the huge in-migration and urbanization pressures that we're seeing as a city, do you think we're going to see a move towards more proactive and affirmative working with informal settlements and informal settlement upgrading policy across the city, given that almost 18.6% of the city's population resides in informal settlements at the moment? And particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing many of those completely unserviced. What is the strategy going forward on that front?
One more question to close. next to the pillar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is John Garrett. I'm an alumni of LSE. Sorry. Yes, my question is, thank you very much for the very fascinating talk. In terms of new investment, you've been to New York, you're in London. I think you're obviously looking to attract investment and jobs in the city. Could you say a little bit about how South Africa's membership of the BRICS potentially opens up new opportunities, and how different are those from perhaps ones that you might find from traveling to America, etc.? Thank you.
That is okay. Okay, thank you, Anna. What a great question on informal settlement upgrading. So that's a different focus area for folks who aren't housing policy experts, as Anna clearly is. There's a whole lot of formal housing programs, which I've outlined quite a few of, but there's also a program that the city has to just upgrade the informal settlements that are already there, and we call that informal settlement upgrading, ISUP. And that's going to continue, and as much as budget allows. We roll out new services and better services, more electrification, wider roads, you name it. There are very, very few totally unserviced informal settlements now. There were 16 that were there in after the COVID period. We have, under the ISU program, we have budgeted to service all of them. And so most of them, some still very rudimentary services, but as we go, we improve those all along. But the premise of your question is still 100% correct, and that is that the state, through the state's delivery mechanism, as I said to the gentleman here, even if we hit our straps and spend every cent of our housing allocation, we can deliver probably 3,000 a year. That doesn't even cover the numbers of growth in demand for 1 month. So really, the small-scale rental units, the potential that it holds to deliver units at scale much, much faster than the state ever can, is really, really exciting, and that has to be where our focus is. I understand the point, of course, that for a very, very long time still, probably decades, there will still be informal settlements in South Africa. But ultimately, I do think that as a national ambition, we should hope for everyone to be out of informal settlements at some point in the future. And other places have done this. This is not a complete impossibility. Of course, it's a long-term goal, but it is not impossible. In the meantime, we have to upgrade those informal settlements and improve services, make sure that emergency services can get in and out, and so on. And that program runs, consistently through the year in Cape Town. John, it's well and good to be members of these clubs, including BRICS, but to be honest, we have not seen a huge amount sorry, there's John. We haven't seen a huge amount of investment from those countries in South Africa or in the Western Cape. Overwhelmingly, the UK, in fact, is the biggest source market for investment in Cape Town. It's more than double the next biggest source market, in fact. So that might change over time, but at the moment, it's important that we double down on where we have success. And clearly, there is a real hunger and receptiveness here in London and in the UK to investing in Cape Town. In America, it's still not as widely known. I think it's harder. There's just fewer South Africans. I think really it is a function of all of you talking about South Africa and being present in the UK economy. Yesterday, we had a meeting with senior business executives, and out of about 15 of them, 5 were South African. So there are many South Africans at senior echelons of business in the UK, and I think that really helps. That's not really the case yet in New York, but certainly there is a receptiveness to our message and a willingness to consider that the news message that they've received about South Africa is not, it's not a homogeneous story. It's not that it doesn't apply uniformly, and that there are other exciting stories happening in South Africa, and Cape Town is one of them.
So it remains my pleasure to thank you all. You've been a great audience, fantastic questions. Thank you very much to people with the roving mics and the support people who've made it possible to be here tonight as well. And a very special thanks to Geordin and to Desney and the people who've accompanied them on their travels. Thank you, Savas. Thanks to all of you. I hope go home safely, enjoy the freeze, and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.